Hey folks, Travis here from Northwoods Overland, coming to you with part one of a two-part series covering the installation and assembly of a Switchpros SP-9100 switch panel power system and my 2019 Toyota 4runner. I do want to say thanks to the folks over at trail4runner.com, as their posts on the installation of this actually served as some of the inspiration for this video. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to see part two when we actually install this stuff in the rig after we put it together. So without further ado, let's get everything unboxed and laid out and we can actually start putting it together. Alright, so as I said, we're going to be using a Powertrays mounting tray today for this installation. And we also had ordered a handful of stubby cables that actually make some of the connections to the battery as well as some of the between some of the bus bars go a little easier. We've got some heat shrink to make things look pretty after we finish the installation. We've got a bunch of marine grade heat shrink connectors. We'll be using these to connect things to and from the bus bars. We've got a heat tool, which is great, so that way we can actually use the heat shrink and of course try to make things all look nice and pretty like we're some fancy OEM shop here. When in reality we're doing this out of a kitchen in Stoneham, Massachusetts. Oh, great. Cool. Here we have the actual Switchpros kit. I guess that's upside down for you looking at the video. Sorry. And then we have a bunch of Blue Sea systems. So the fuse block here, we have a bus bar. We also have a terminal block to be able to connect things to and from. Some bolts and nuts to be able to actually connect these to the Powertray. And some Loctites so that things don't actually vibrate out. So some of these things we actually don't need in today's video, so I'll actually throw those off to the side for now. Perfect. Now that we have everything laid out, we can start doing some of the rough fit on everything and then start tying everything down. So swap cameras around a little bit so we can give you guys a little bit better of a view, looking over the shoulder, looking down sideways, so you're not seeing everything upside down. We'll jump right back in. Alright, so now that we have a little bit better view for everybody, first thing we want to do is let's get the Switchpro panel actually mounted onto the Powertray. So this is just a flathead screw and a 7mm bolt. Not sure if I mentioned earlier that we're actually using a Powertrays Switchpro mounting tray that's been custom made for the mounting of a Switchpro SP-9100 system in your 4runner. They make a bunch of other models as well that include, there we go, beautiful. So now that that's installed, great, let's get some of the other bus bars on as well. So this here is where we can go with our number 8 5/8 inch length. Now these might be a little too short. I wasn't sure, so I got longer as well, just in case. But looks like we're pretty good from a foot size. So the number 8 32 5/8 inch bolts and corresponding nut should work perfectly here. So now, put a little Loctite on the inside of our bolt, our nut, and get that installed like that. Now I usually do everything finger tight until I actually finalize the installation, and then I'll come back and tighten everything down a little bit more. Now you don't need a heck of a lot of Loctite when you're using this, just enough to on the threads underneath. Cool. Bus bar's on. Next we want to move toward the terminal bar. Actually, forgot the Loctite. These ones might actually be better with the size number 10, yes. Perfect, so let's go to the size number 10 here. It's a little bit of play, and I'd rather it be a little tighter. Now if you're really trying to get it nice and tight and just the right size, you probably can actually go with a 1/2 inch or even 3/8 inch length for the ones that are actually connecting to your terminal bar. Or your bus bar, sorry, that's the terminal bar. Alright, and then the last thing is the fuse panel. If I can get the top off, it'll break that. Great success. And for this one, we'll actually go back to the number 8 screws. Perfect. Size fit is good. And now I'm realizing I installed my fuse box, the fuse side, upside down. Alright, beautiful. Everything seems to fit, sits the way we want it to. So now we can go through and we can actually tighten everything down. Let's just check on the size. Looks like they're 8mm. everything's attached and snug. Alright, so the next thing we got to do is plug this in and start feeding our wires around and through here to actually be able to be mounted. Beautiful. So here's our first 4 ends that we're going to be using and wiring those into the first 4 items here on the bus bar. That's where we'll actually come in with these size 4 marine shrink insulated connectors. All right, and we want the forking type. So that will be these guys here. So what we'll do is we'll be trimming these down to fit, and then splicing one of these onto it with a little bit of heat shrink on top of that as well, so we can actually shrink all of these down and crimp them on. So the ideal world, this will actually be feeding itself up underneath here to keep things nice and clean. So when you do this, you want to make sure that when you're trimming these cables that you're not trimming them too far that you're putting any pressure on the harness, but you're trimming them far enough that you actually have a little bit of play inside of this when you're actually trying to mount these after you've mounted the connectors. So for now, we'll actually go here, go like this. To give us a rough fit on exactly the length that we want to go, we can deal with a little extra wire there. And then we'll cut these up and trim them all out and then start mounting our forked connectors. All right, so as we want to lay these out, the order for this, we actually have to take a look at the Switchpros wiring diagram. So we actually want to put them in order from right to left. 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the order is going to be brown, red, orange, and yellow. So by looking at this here, looks like we've got enough play. We've got enough here. Yeah, we'll probably be good to go and clip each of these at the top of where it comes to the top of here. That should give us enough play in both the cable to strip it, as well as not put a lot of stress on the harness when we actually wire this back in. Now the extra wire you can just toss off to the side or keep if you have other projects or side things that you might want to do. So now we've got the 4 of those all set. We'll actually bring these over here and start doing a little stripping so we can actually add the fork back to it. Third time's the charm. Beautiful. Now, before we forget, we actually wrap that around. We want to make sure that we actually have a piece of 1/4 inch shrink wrap, and then that will actually be able to sink its way over and make everything look nice and pretty. So we don't actually need the full length. We could probably cut these in half. So do that. We actually get 2 out of each. Awesome. So now we can test the fit. Perfect. All right, and the first one's on. Fits good. Not too much tension on the wire. We can play around with it a little bit more. So everything else looks good here, other than the fact that we'll actually seat it on it when we do it correctly. But the fit looks good there, so we can actually go and finish up with the rest of them, and then we'll come back after the fact and we'll heat gun them all, and we should be all set. And we want to make sure that we're not actually touching any of these wires here. So we have our black, which is our ground. We have our light blue, which is going to be connected to the ignition ultimately. We have a light pink, which will be attached. This is the external trigger or input wire. And then we have the white here, which is actually going to be connected to a fuse that is connected to the lights. So we'll keep those out of our way just to make sure they don't get cut as we finish things up over here. All right, so we've got everything on and we have rough fits. So now let's just make sure everything curls underneath the way we want it to. Perfect. Everything on this side looks good. So, length fit looks good. Everything else is in. So let's bust out the heat gun. Let's finish these up so they look nice and pretty, and then we'll actually get them installed. Cool. As we got our heat gun out, we also cleaned up the workspace a little bit so we don't burn anything on accident, because that's the last thing we need right now. And we can start. So the first thing we can start with here is actually doing the heat wrap around the fork connection, and then we'll slide the actual shrink wrap over all of that and encase all of it. It has a couple of different protections. It helps kind of seal in the connection inside of here, as well as being able to kind of keep out things like moisture and water and things like that, especially when you start doing a little bit more crazier off-roading, depending on what you're building your rig up for. So just start up here and we'll go through all of them and pick up after. Alright, and that's our 8. We'll let that cool off for just a second, and then we'll actually start looping these back around and screwing them in. Alright, now that our ends are all pretty, time to loop them back underneath and connect the forks back into the bar. So, starting again with the brown, loop this around, seat the fork, and sometimes it may help to actually try to either use a screwdriver or a wrench to actually wedge that in there while you're trying to tighten it down. Definitely gets a little tight. I also have some big fat fingers, so that could be playing a part of this as well with the struggle that you're seeing. Awesome. So now we have all of the wires in. We'll revisit a couple of these because they're a little loose here, but once you get them all in, then we're actually able to put the caps back on. Oh, don't want to forget about this little stubby here. So this little stubby is something that actually Powertrays will build out for you, and it allows you to connect your negative to your negative in the bus bar here. And then we'll tighten those down a little bit tighter than finger tight when we actually go to install it in the 4runner. So that takes us through most of the installation here when it comes to the assembly of all of these Blue Sea components, as well as the Switchpros tray, to get a nice clean look for when you actually want to add your additional accessories. As I mentioned earlier, if you want to see part 2 when we actually install this into the 4runner, please subscribe and ding the bell so you can get notified when I actually upload the next video in the series. Otherwise, thanks for staying along. I hope you learned something and gave you some inspiration for some stuff you'd like to do to your rig, and I hope you have a wonderful time. Thanks.